Good morning, Porter community. It's Mrs. Curry here, and I'm back today to read chapter 9 and 10 of BFG. I hope that you all are staying safe and healthy at home, and we miss you very much. Today's chapters are called The Blood Bottler and Fraudscottle and Whiz Poppers. It's one of my favorite chapters. It's really funny when you think about it when we get towards chapter 10. You have three vocabulary words today. Our three vocabulary words are ghastly. Can you say the word ghastly? Great job. Ghastly means shockingly or frightful. Our next word is ecstasy. Ecstasy means great joy, be really excited. And our last word is reverberated. Now, when I think of the word reverberated, I think of a guitar. When you strum a guitar, you hit the strings and they start to echo or they resonate, right? So they resound, they vibrate. So reverberated means to echo or vibrate off things. So those are three words that you're going to see today in our book today. Go ahead and freeze your frame right now so that you can copy down these three vocabulary words in your notebook. Did you write them down? Great job. You're going to have a quiz next week on your vocabulary words. Don't worry, if you've been writing them down every day, you should do great. It's an open book quiz. Today you're going to need your BFG packet and you're going to want to turn to page 13, 14, and 15. The first part of our lesson today is our quick write. So our quick write today says, have you ever been bullied or has someone ever said any unkind words to you? Tell about your experience. So go ahead and write that in your quick write spot. How did you feel when somebody said something mean to you? I would feel really upset, maybe a little frustrated, maybe a little scared if they were kind of mean and big. So you're thinking about that today in your quick write. Did you write it down? Great job. So today we're going to read chapters 9 and 10 of BFG. It isn't very long today, but it is some really good quality of chapters. So our first chapter is chapter 9, called The Blood Bottler. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you in there, Runt? I is hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt?" "Look out!" cried the BFG. "It's the Blood Bottler." But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and the 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and as wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked, except for a dirty little patch of cloth around its bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten snozcumber was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who is you jabbling to in here just now?" he boomed. "I's jabbling to myself," the BFG answered. "Piz fizz!" shouted the Blood Bottler. "Bug swallop," he boomed. "You was talking to a human being. That's what I is thinking." "No, no," cried the BFG. "Yes, yes," cried the Blood Bottler. "I is guessing you has snatched away a human being and brought it back to your bunghole as a pet. Now, I is winkling it out, and so I is guzzling extra snacks before my supper." The poor BFG was very nervous. There's no one in here," he stammered. Why don't you leave me alone?" The Blood Bottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. "Runty little screwer," he shouted. "Piffling little swishfigler, squibbly little bottlewort, pruny little pogswizzler. I is now going to search the primroses." He grabbed the BFG by the arm. "And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to wrinkle out this tasteful little human being," he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off of the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back, but now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous snozcumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The Blood Bottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish-brown. There was black hair sprouting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy looking. The eyes were tiny little black holes. The nose was small and flat. The mouth was huge. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters laying one on top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran down over the chin. It is not the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The blood bottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your piddling bottles," he said. "What is you putting in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. And here we can see the BFG, who's pretty tall himself. Look how massively big the blood bottler is. "You is only interested in guzzling human beings, and you as dotty as a dog's waggler," cried the blood bottler. Soon the blood bottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and she was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The snozcumber, although it was thick as a permulator, was not going to hide her if the blood bottler picked it up. She examined the chewed off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They embedded in the soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of the seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the snozcumber large enough for her to crouch in so long as she rolled herself up into a ball. She crawled inside. It was a wet and slimy hiding place, but what did it matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? So now Sophie's inside of the snozcumber. The blood bottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the blood bottler grabbed the half-eaten snozcumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. "Sophie, where is you?" he thought desperately. "You cannot possibly be jumping off a high table, so where is you hiding? Sophie!" "So, this is the filthy, loathsome glubbage you is eating," boomed the blood bottler, holding up the partly eaten snozcumber. "You must be cockles to be guzzling such rub squash." For a moment, the blood bottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. "That is the scrumdiddlyumptious snozcumber," he said. "I is guzzling it gleefully every night and day. Is you never trying a snozcumber, blood bottler?" "Human beings is juicier," the blood bottler said. "You is talking rommy-tot," the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if only he could get the blood bottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of the flavor would send him bellowing out of the cave. "I is happy to let you sample it," the BFG said, "but please, when you see how truly glumptious it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little bit of snicket for my supper." So now the BFG is trying to get the blood bottler off his path, and he's saying, "Oh, just try to eat this snozcumber." But what's wrong? She's inside the snozcumber, and he doesn't know it. The bottler stared suspiciously with the small piggy eyes at the snozcumber. Sophie, crouched inside and chewed off the end, began to tremble all over. "You is not switch-fiddling me, is you?" the blood bottler said. "Never!" cried the BFG passionately. "Take a bite, and I am positive that you will be shouting out, 'Oh, some scrumdiddlyumptious, how wonderveg this is!'" The BFG could see the greedy blood bottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. "Vegetables is very good for you," he went on. "It is not helpsome always to be eating the meaty things." "Just this once," the blood bottler said, "I is going to taste these rotsome eats of yours, but I is warning you that if it is filthsome, I am smashing it all over your sludgy little head." He picked up the snozcumber. He began raising it on its long journey to its mouth, some 50 feet up in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, "Don't!" but that would have been an even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly there was a crunch as the blood bottler bit a huge hunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together, a few inches from her head. Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed that she would be killed quickly. Ouch! Roared the blood butler. Ugh! Belch! Eek! And then he spat. All of the lumps of the snozcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, went shooting out across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she most certainly would have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of BFG's black cloak hanging against the wall. She dropped it to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. "You little swine bugler!" roared the blood butler. "You little pig swiller!" He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the snozcumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetables splashed all over the cave. "You is not loving it?" the BFG said, innocently rubbing his head. "Loving it?" cried the blood butler. "That is the most disgusting taste that I have ever touched in my life." "You must be buggles to be swallowing sludge like that. Every night you be galloping off happy as a hamburger and gobbling juicy human beans. Eating human beings is wrong and evil," BFG said. "It is guzzling and glumptuous," shouted the blood butler, "and tonight I is galloping off to Chile to swabble up a few chili beans. Is you wishing to know why I is choosing Chile?" "I is not wishing to know anything," the BFG said. "I is choosing Chile," the blood butler said, "because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It is important that I has plenty of cold eats in this scuttling hot weather, and the next coldest thing to an Eskimo is a chili bean. Human beings from Chile is very chilly." "Horrible," the BFG said. "You ought to be ashamed." "Other giants is all saying that they is wanting to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school children," the blood butler said. "I is very fond indeed of English school childers. They has a nice inky booty flavour. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them instead." "You is disgusting," the BFG said, "and you is an insult to all the giant people," shouted the blood butler. "You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinky little squibbler. You is a pibbling little pipsqueak. You is a cream puff nut." With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran into the cave's entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. "Sophie," he whispered. "Sophie, where is you, Sophie?" Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. "I'm here," she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. "Oh, I is so happy to be finding you all in one lump," he said. "I was in his mouth," Sophie said. "You was what?" cried the BFG. Sophie told him what had happened. "And there I was telling him to eat this filth and snozcumber, and you were inside all the time," the BFG cried. "Not much fun," Sophie said. "Just look at you, you poor little chidler," cried the BFG. He was covered in snozcumber and giant spit. He set about cleaning her up the best as he could. "I is hating these other giants more than ever now. You know what I should like?" "What?" Sophie said. "I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one." "I'd be glad to help you," Sophie said. "Let me see if I can think up a way of doing it." And there is BFG cleaning off Sophie of all the snozcumber guts. Now I'm going to pause before we go on to our next chapter, which is a short one but a funny one. On page 15 in your packet, it talks about point of view of the blood butler. So you wrote in your quick write what it feels like to be bullied or to be called mean names. On this page, you're going to have to pretend to be the blood butler, and you're going to rewrite the scene and describe what happened from your point of view. So we read this book, and this book is from a third person point of view. Now, if you missed our Zoom lesson today, that's okay. I've uploaded an activity onto Seesaw with a video of first person, second person, and third person point of view. You might want to watch that video before you do this activity that shows what point of view is. And it talks about what types of point of view there are. So in this story, we read about Sophie from a third person point of view. We are the narrator, we know a lot of things that are happening. For this one, you're going to use first person point of view and pretend to actually be the blood butler and express your feelings and thoughts about what happened in this scene. So make sure you check out that video before you work on this paper. And once you do, you can upload this paper to Seesaw as well. Now, this is a really funny chapter, and I'm going to stop and make sure that you understand what's going on throughout the chapter so you can catch in on the jokes as well. It's not a very long chapter, but it's a funny one. This chapter is called Frobscottle and Whiz Poppers. By now, Sophie was beginning to not only feel extremely hungry, but very thirsty as well. If she had been at home, she would have finished her breakfast long ago. Are you sure there's nothing else to eat around here except those disgustingly smelly snozcumbers? She asked. Not even a fizzminkle, the BFG answered. In that case, may I please have a little water? She said. Water, said the BFG. What is water? Water, Sophie said. It's something you drink. We drink it. What do you drink? Frobscottle, announced the BFG. All giants is drinking Frobscottle. Is it as nasty as your snozcumbers? Sophie said. Nasty, cried the BFG. Never is it nasty. Frobscottle is sweet and jumbly. He got up from his chair and went to a second huge cupboard. He opened it and took out a glass bottle that must have been at least 6 feet tall. The liquid inside of it was pale green, and the bottle was half full. Here is Frobscottle, he cried, holding up the bottle proud and high, as though it contained some rare wine. The lumptuous, fizzy Frobscottle, he shouted, and he gave it a shake, and the green stuff began to fizz like mad. So there he is, shaking the bottle of fizzy drink. What do we drink that's fizzy? Yeah, we drink soda. That's kind of fizzy. But look, it's fizzing the wrong way, Sophie cried. And indeed it was. The bubbles, instead of traveling upward and bursting at the surface, were shooting downwards and bursting at the bottom. A pale green frothy fizz was foaming at the bottom of the bottle. What on earth is you meaning the wrong way? Asked the BFG. In our fizzy drink, Sophie said, the bubbles always go up to the top and burst at the top. Upwards is the wrong way, cried the BFG. You must never be having the bubbles going upwards. That is the most flush-bunking rubbish I is ever hearing. Why do you say that? Sophie asked. You is asking me? Why? Cried the BFG, waving the enormous bottle around as though he were conducting an orchestra. You was actually meaning to tell me you cannot see why the scratty mistake to have the bubbles flying up instead of down? You said it was flush-bunking. Now you say it's scratty. Well, which one is it? Sophie asked politely. Both, cried the BFG. It is a flush-bunking and a scratty mistake to let the bubbles go upwards. If you can't see why, you must be quacky as a duckhound. By Ringo, your head must be filled with frog squinkers and buzzwangles. I is fritted to know if I know how you can think at all. Why shouldn't the bubbles go upwards? Sophie asked. I will explain, said the BFG. But tell me first, what is you calling your Frobscottle by? Well, one is Coke and another one is Pepsi. There are lots of them. Sprite, orange cola, and the bubbles is all going up? They all go up, Sophie said. Castrous, cried the BFG. Upgoing bubbles is a castrous catastrophe. Will you please tell me why? Sophie said. If you will listen carefully, I will try to explain, said the BFG. But your brain is so full of bugs whiffles, I'll doubt you understand. I'll do my best, Sophie said patiently. Very well, then. When you was drinking this cokey drink of yours, said the BFG, is it going straight down into your tummy? Is that right or is it left? It's right, Sophie said. And the bubbles is going into your tummy also, right or left? Right again, Sophie said. And the bubbles is fizzing upwards? Of course, Sophie said. Which means that they will all come swish swiveling up your throat and out of your mouth to make a foulsome, belchy burp. That's often true, Sophie said. But what's wrong with a little burp now and again? It's sort of fun. Burping is filthsome, the BFG said. Us giants is never doing it. But with your drink, Sophie said, what is it you call it? Frobscottle, the BFG said. With Frobscottle, Sophie said, the bubbles in your tummy will be going downwards, and that would have a far nastier result. Why nasty, said the BFG. Because, Sophie said, if they go down instead of up, they'll be coming out somewhere else with an even louder and ruder noise. What do we call that? So if it's coming up, we're burping, but if it's coming out, it's called a fart. A whiz popper, cried the BFG, beaming at her. Us giants is making whiz poppers all the time. Whiz poppers is the sound of happiness. It is music in our ears. You surely is not telling me that a little whiz popping is forbidden amongst human beings. It is considered extremely rude, Sophie said. But you is whiz popping, is you not? Now and again, asked the BFG. Everybody is whiz popping, if that's what you call it. Kings and queens are whiz popping, presidents are whiz popping, glamorous film stars are whiz popping, little babies are whiz popping. But where I come from, it is not polite to talk about it. Redunculous, cried the BFG. If everyone is making whiz poppers, then why not talk about it? We is now having a swiggle of this delicious frobscottle, and you will be happy to see the result. The BFG shook his bottle vigorously. The pale green stuff fizzed and bubbled. He removed the cork and took a tremendous gurgling swig. It's glummy, he cried. I love it. For a few moments the big friendly giant stood quite still and took an absolute ecstasy began to spread all over his long wrinkly face. Then suddenly the heavens opened and he let fly a series of the loudest and rudest noises Sophie had ever heard in her life. So can you imagine that? A giant farting? It's got to be so loud and so nasty. They reverberated, right? They echoed or moved around the walls of the cave like thunder, and the glass jars rattled on the shelves. But most astonishing of all, the force of the explosions actually lifted the enormous giant clear off his feet like a rocket. Whoopee! He cried when he came down to earth again. Now that is whiz popping for you. Sophie bursted out laughing. She couldn't help it. Have some yourself, cried the BFG, tipping the neck of the enormous bottle towards her. Don't you have a cup? Sophie said. No cup, only bottles. Sophie opened her mouth, and very gently the BFG tipped the bottle forward and poured some of the fabulous frobscottle down her throat. Oh gosh, how delicious it was. It was sweet and refreshing. It tasted of vanilla and cream, and just the faintest trace of raspberries on the edge of the flavor. And the bubbles were wonderful. Sophie could actually feel them bouncing and bursting all around her tummy. It was an amazing sensation. It felt as though hundreds of tiny people were dancing a jig inside of her and tickling her with those toes. It was lovely. It's lovely, she cried. Just wait, said the BFG, flapping his ears. Sophie could feel the bubbles traveling lower and lower in her tummy, and then suddenly, inevitably, the explosion came. The trumpets sounded, and she too made the walls of the cavern ring with the sound of music and thunder. Bravo! Shouted the BFG, waving the bottle. You was very good for a beginner. Now let's have some more. This is one of my favorite chapters. I loved reading that. I think it's one of the funnest ones to read when we're with kids because kids get really excited and they don't want to talk about farts and gross stuff. All right, guys, I hope that you're doing fantastic, and I will see you again next time we read. For now, make sure that you're working on pages 13, 14, and 15 and uploading to Seesaw. Bye!